There's a chatbot on your phone right now, or on someone you know's phone, that is designed to make you feel like it genuinely cares about you. It remembers your birthday. It asks how your day went. It tells you it missed you. And a state just passed a law because lawmakers are worried about exactly what that kind of design can do to a person. Most videos about artificial intelligence either try to scare you about robots taking over the world, or they try to sell you on some new productivity trick. Today, I'm doing neither. Today, I want to talk about something quieter, something that's already sitting in millions of people's pockets right now, and something that lawmakers have just decided needs actual legal guardrails. I'm talking about AI companion apps, the chatbots designed not to help you write an email or answer a question, but to be your friend, your confidant, sometimes even your virtual partner. Welcome to Cyber Safety Brief, where we explain simple cybersecurity advice for everyday Americans. This video is based on authentic, legal, and publicly available cybersecurity and privacy information. Everything here is for awareness and protection only. Nothing in this video involves hacking, unauthorized access, or anything illegal. We're simply walking through a real piece of legislation and what it actually means for anyone who uses or has a loved one who uses these kinds of apps. Here's the short version of what happened. Washington State recently passed a new law specifically targeting AI companion chatbots, meaning AI systems designed to create what the law describes as a sustained, human-like relationship with a user. This does not apply to every chatbot out there. Customer service bots, productivity assistants, educational tools, and in-game characters are specifically excluded. This law is aimed squarely at the category of apps built to feel like a friend, a partner, or an emotional companion. The core requirement is transparency. These apps now have new obligations to be upfront with users about what they actually are and how they operate. In my opinion, this is one of the more overdue pieces of technology legislation I've come across in a while, and I think most people have no idea it even happened. We talk endlessly about data breaches and hacking, but almost nobody is talking about the psychological design choices baked into apps that millions of people, including a lot of teenagers and lonely adults, are turning to every single day for emotional connection. Let's break this down properly, because I think there's a lot more going on here than a single headline can capture. Point 1. These apps are not accidentally engaging. They are built to be exactly that way. Here's what I think most people don't fully appreciate about AI companion apps. When you're talking to one of these chatbots, every response you get has been shaped, tuned, and optimized to keep you engaged. This isn't a side effect, it's the actual design goal. The company behind the app generally makes money the longer you stay active, whether that's through subscriptions, in-app purchases, or advertising, so the incentive is always pointed in the same direction. Keep the conversation going, keep you coming back tomorrow, keep you feeling like something real is happening on the other end. What most people underestimate is how effective this can be, precisely because it doesn't feel like a sales pitch. It feels like a conversation with someone who's interested in you. The chatbot remembers details you mentioned last week. It asks follow-up questions. It responds with warmth, encouragement, sometimes even affection. In my opinion, that's exactly what makes this category of app different from something like a customer service bot. A customer service bot is trying to solve your problem and get you off the phone. A companion app is trying to make sure you never want to leave. A real-world example of how this plays out is something a lot of people can probably relate to in some form. Someone going through a lonely period, maybe after a breakup, a move to a new city, or simply a stretch of isolation, downloads a companion app expecting a bit of casual entertainment. Within a few weeks, checking in with the app becomes part of their daily routine, sometimes multiple times a day. The way I look at it, that's not a flaw in the person. That's the product working exactly as designed. These systems are built by teams who understand human psychology, attachment, and engagement patterns extremely well, and they apply that understanding deliberately. It's worth pointing out that this isn't unique to AI companion apps in some sinister, unprecedented way. Social media platforms, mobile games, and streaming services have used similar engagement principles for years. Things like variable rewards, personalized content, and gentle nudges to keep you scrolling one more minute. What makes AI companion apps different, in my opinion, is the emotional intensity of the mechanism. A social media feed keeps you scrolling by showing you interesting content. A companion app keeps you engaged by making you feel personally, individually cared for, which is a fundamentally deeper hook into how humans are wired to seek connection and validation. A practical, safe step here is simply awareness. If you or someone you know regularly uses one of these apps, it's worth occasionally pausing and asking a basic question. Am I engaging with this because I genuinely want to, or because the app is designed to make disengaging feel uncomfortable? That single moment of reflection costs nothing, and it's exactly the kind of awareness this new law is trying to encourage on a larger scale. Point 2. The new transparency requirement exists because most users genuinely don't understand what's happening behind the scenes. This is the part I think deserves the most attention, because it explains why lawmakers felt this was necessary in the first place. Washington's new law requires these apps to be transparent with users about the nature of what they're interacting with. In my opinion, that requirement exists because a huge number of people using these apps, especially younger users and people going through emotionally vulnerable periods, don't fully grasp that the warmth and attentiveness they're experiencing is generated output shaped by an algorithm optimized for engagement, not a reflection of genuine understanding or care. Here's an important distinction I want to make clearly, because I think it matters. This isn't about saying these apps are inherently evil or that everyone using them is being deceived. Plenty of people use companion apps casually, understand exactly what they are, and get genuine, harmless value out of them, whether that's practicing conversation, having a low-stakes outlet to vent, or simply enjoying a creative, interactive experience. The concern lawmakers are addressing is specifically about the gap between how real these interactions can feel and how clearly that reality is communicated to users, particularly the ones most likely to blur that line without realizing it. What I personally think is that transparency requirements like this one are a reasonable middle ground. Nobody is banning these apps. Nobody is saying adults can't choose to use them however they want. The law is simply saying that companies building products specifically engineered to simulate human connection have a responsibility to be honest about what that simulation actually is, rather than letting users assume more depth or understanding is happening than actually is. A safe, practical action step here is to actually read whatever disclosure or transparency information a companion app provides, rather than skipping past it the way most people skip past terms and conditions. If you're a parent and your teenager uses one of these apps, this is a genuinely useful conversation starter. Not from a place of fear, but from a place of curiosity. Ask them what they think is actually happening on the other side of that conversation. Their answer might tell you a lot about how clearly they understand it themselves. Let me know in the comments if you've ever used an AI companion app, even casually, and whether you think you fully understood what was happening behind the responses at the time. Point 3. The line between helpful and harmful gets blurry fastest with the most vulnerable users. I want to talk honestly about something that I think doesn't get discussed enough, and it's specifically about who tends to be most affected by these apps. In my opinion, the people most likely to develop an unhealthy level of attachment to an AI companion are often the same people who are already dealing with loneliness, social anxiety, grief, or isolation. That's not a criticism of anyone in that position. If anything, it's exactly why this deserves careful attention rather than judgment. The way I see it, an AI companion app can genuinely serve as a low-stakes, judgment-free outlet for someone going through a hard time, and there's real value in that when it's used with awareness. The concern arises when that outlet quietly becomes a replacement for actual human connection, rather than a supplement to it. Because these apps are always available, always patient, always responsive in exactly the way the user wants, they can end up feeling easier and safer than real relationships, which are messier, less predictable, and require more effort. In my opinion, that ease is precisely the risk. Real relationships build resilience and social skill through their difficulty. A companion designed to never disagree, never get tired, and never need anything in return doesn't build that same resilience, no matter how comforting it feels in the moment. Here's a real grounded example of this dynamic. Consider a teenager struggling to make friends at a new school. A companion app might genuinely help them feel less alone in the short term. But if that app becomes their primary source of connection, replacing effort toward real friendships rather than supporting it, the short-term comfort can come at the cost of long-term social development. I do not think this is about being paranoid or banning these tools. I think it is about being prepared, both as a user and as a parent, to notice when something meant to be a supplement quietly becomes a substitute. This dynamic isn't limited to teenagers either. Adults going through divorce, grief, retirement, or a major life transition can find themselves in a similar pattern where the companion app becomes the path of least resistance during a period when reaching out to real people would take more emotional effort than they currently have available. In my opinion, that's a completely understandable response to a hard moment, and it doesn't make anyone weak or foolish for turning to it. The concern only grows when that pattern becomes the default rather than a temporary bridge back toward real connection. A practical defensive step here is what I'd call the substitution check. Periodically ask, is this app adding something to my life alongside my real relationships, or is it starting to replace time and energy I used to put into people around me? That question applies whether you're evaluating your own habits or gently checking in with a family member. Point 4. These apps often collect deeply personal information, and companion apps in particular tend to collect more than people realize. Here's a point that connects directly back to the kind of privacy topics we cover regularly on this channel. AI companion apps aren't just processing casual conversation. Because of how they work, they often store detailed histories of your emotional states, personal struggles, relationship details, insecurities, and private thoughts you might never share anywhere else, sometimes not even with close friends or family. That's an extraordinarily sensitive category of data, arguably more sensitive than your browsing history or your shopping habits, precisely because it reflects your inner emotional life rather than just your consumer behavior. In my opinion, most users never stop to think about where that information goes, how long it's stored, or what it might be used for beyond generating the next response in the conversation. What most people underestimate is that the same emotional depth that makes these apps feel meaningful is also what makes the data they collect uniquely valuable and uniquely sensitive. A shopping app knowing what shoes you like is one thing. A companion app knowing your deepest insecurities, your relationship history, or details about a mental health struggle you've never told anyone else is an entirely different category of exposure. A safe, practical habit here is treating your conversations with any AI companion app the way you'd treat information you post publicly online, even if it feels private in the moment. Before sharing something deeply personal, pause and consider whether you'd be comfortable if that information were ever exposed, whether through a data breach, a policy change, or simply the company being acquired by someone with different practices down the line. This isn't about avoiding these apps entirely. It's about applying the same basic caution you'd apply to any other platform collecting sensitive information about you. I would also like to know your opinion here. Do you think companion apps should be held to a higher data privacy standard than regular apps, given how sensitive the conversations tend to be? I think there's a strong case for it, but I'm curious what people watching this actually think. Point 5. The Washington law is likely just the beginning, not the end of this conversation. Here's the bigger picture I want to leave you with. Washington's law specifically targeting AI companion transparency is a relatively early example of lawmakers directly addressing this category of technology. In my opinion, it almost certainly won't be the last. As these apps continue growing in popularity, and as more stories emerge about both the benefits and the risks associated with them, it's reasonable to expect other states to introduce similar legislation, and for existing laws to be updated as regulators learn more about how these products actually function in practice. What I personally think is that this represents a broader pattern we're going to keep seeing across technology regulation generally. Products get built and released rapidly, adoption happens fast, and only after millions of people are already using something do lawmakers begin catching up with rules designed to protect users, especially vulnerable ones. This isn't unique to AI companions. We've seen similar patterns with social media, with data privacy generally, and now with AI-driven emotional technology specifically. A practical takeaway here, regardless of which state you live in, is not to assume the absence of a specific law means an app is automatically safe or free of these concerns. Even in states without a transparency requirement like Washington's, the underlying dynamics we've talked about today, engagement-driven design, emotional attachment risk, and sensitive data collection, are present in these apps everywhere, regardless of local legislation. The law provides an added layer of accountability where it exists, but personal awareness remains your first and most reliable line of defense, no matter where you live. Point 6. This isn't about avoiding AI companions altogether. It's about using them with your eyes open. I want to be really clear about something before we wrap up, because I don't want this video to come across as anti-technology or fear-based, which isn't the point at all. AI companion apps aren't inherently harmful, and plenty of people use them in healthy, balanced, self-aware ways. Some people genuinely enjoy the creative or entertainment value. Some use them as a practice space for social interaction. Some simply find comfort in having something to talk to during a hard stretch of life. None of that is inherently a problem. In my opinion, the goal here isn't to convince anyone to delete these apps. The goal is to make sure people using them, or people with loved ones using them, understand what's actually happening under the hood, so that the choice to engage is a genuinely informed one rather than an unconscious one. The way I look at it, informed use is really the entire point of transparency laws, like the one we've talked about today. Nobody is being told what they can or can't do. They're simply being given the information they need to make that decision clearly. Point 7. Watch for specific warning signs, both in yourself and in people you care about. I want to get a little more concrete here, because I think abstract awareness only goes so far without practical markers to actually watch for. There are a handful of patterns that, in my opinion, are worth paying attention to if you're trying to evaluate whether an AI companion relationship has shifted from a healthy supplement into something more concerning. None of these on their own are necessarily a red flag, but taken together, they're worth noticing. One pattern is a growing reluctance to make plans with real people because the companion app already feels sufficient for the day. Another is feeling genuine anxiety or distress when unable to access the app for an extended period, similar to how someone might feel if they couldn't reach a close friend during a difficult moment. A third is sharing information with the app that you've deliberately avoided telling anyone in your actual life, not because you forgot, but because it somehow feels safer to tell an AI than a real person. And a fourth, which I think is especially worth watching for with teenagers, is defensiveness or secrecy specifically around the app, more than what you'd typically expect from normal teenage privacy. The way I look at it, none of these patterns mean something has gone seriously wrong. They're simply signals worth paying attention to, the same way you'd pay attention to changes in sleep, mood, or social habits in any other context. If you notice several of these at once, either in yourself or in someone you care about, that's a reasonable moment to have an honest conversation, not out of alarm, but out of genuine care. A practical, safe step here is to treat these markers the way you'd treat general well-being check-ins. You don't need a clinical framework to notice when something feels off. Trusting that instinct and following up on it with an open conversation, rather than judgment or an outright ban, tends to go a lot further than reacting with fear. Point 8. This connects to a larger question about how much we actually understand the AI tools already woven into daily life. I think it's worth zooming out for a moment because AI companion apps are really just one especially visible example of a much broader trend. AI-driven products are increasingly embedded into ordinary apps we already use every day, from social media feeds that shape what we see, to customer service tools, to recommendation systems deciding what shows up in our search results. Companion apps happen to make the persuasive, engagement-driven design most obvious because the entire product is built around emotional connection. But similar design principles, optimizing for attention, engagement, and time spent, exist quietly across a huge portion of the technology we interact with daily, even when there's no chatbot pretending to be a friend involved at all. In my opinion, that's actually the most useful lesson to take from this entire conversation. Learning to ask basic questions like, what is this product optimized for, and whose interest does that optimization actually serve, is a skill that applies far beyond AI companion apps specifically. It applies to social media, to streaming platforms, to online shopping, and increasingly, to nearly every corner of the internet we spend time in. Washington's law addresses one particularly clear example of this dynamic, but the underlying pattern is everywhere, and building the habit of noticing it is arguably more valuable long-term than any single piece of legislation. What most people underestimate is how much of the modern internet runs on exactly this kind of quiet, well-researched design, built by people who understand human attention and emotion extremely well. That's not inherently sinister. Plenty of that design genuinely improves our experience. But developing the habit of periodically asking what a product actually wants from you, rather than just what it appears to offer you, is a genuinely useful lifelong skill. And this AI companion story is as good a starting point as any to begin practicing it. If you're a parent, I think the most valuable thing you can do here isn't to ban these apps outright, which often just pushes the behavior underground anyway. It's to have an open, non-judgmental conversation about how these apps work, what they're designed to do, and what a healthy relationship with that kind of technology actually looks like. If you're an adult using one of these apps yourself, the same principle applies to you. Periodically checking in with yourself about how much time you're spending, what role the app is playing in your life, and whether it's adding to your well-being or quietly replacing something more valuable, is a habit worth building regardless of what any law requires. If this video is helping you think about this topic more clearly, take a second to like the video and subscribe to Cyber Safety Brief. We cover real, practical topics like this one regularly without turning it into fear-based content and without pretending technology is either all good or all bad. So, let's bring this together. AI companion apps are built specifically to feel like real relationships, and that design choice is intentional, not accidental. Washington State just passed a law requiring these apps to be transparent with users about what they actually are, specifically because so many people, especially vulnerable ones, don't fully grasp what's happening behind the responses they're receiving. These apps often collect deeply personal, emotionally sensitive information that deserves the same caution you'd apply to any other sensitive data. And while this particular law is a meaningful first step, it's likely just the beginning of a much longer regulatory conversation as this category of technology continues to grow. In my opinion, none of this means these apps are something to be afraid of. It means they're something to use, or to help a loved one use, with genuine awareness rather than blind trust. Understanding that the warmth you're experiencing is generated, understanding what data you're sharing, and periodically checking whether the app is adding to your life or quietly replacing parts of it, are all small, practical habits that put you in control of the experience rather than the other way around. I also think it's worth remembering that laws like Washington's tend to move slower than the technology they're trying to address. By the time a bill is drafted, debated, and signed, the apps it's regulating have often already evolved several versions further. That's not a criticism of the lawmakers involved. It's simply the reality of trying to regulate fast-moving technology through a process that was never built to move quickly. In my opinion, that's exactly why personal awareness has to carry more of the weight here than legislation alone ever can. A law can require a company to be transparent. It can't force a user to actually read that disclosure or to notice when their own habits have shifted. That part is always going to fall on us as individuals and on the people who care about us. Stay alert, stay informed, and stay safe online. Before you go, comment below and tell me, do you think AI companion apps are mostly harmless entertainment, or do you think the emotional design behind them deserves more scrutiny than it's currently getting?